Welcome to my modern and research presentation for the final project, a vision of cultural significance from Norse mythology. To start, how my modern interpretation connects to the research project. I decided to work with Thor's hammer as my ancient artifact, and I did this because I thought it'd be a really good way to visually compare the modern and ancient between each other. And in the project, or in the paper, I should say, I hope to highlight more on how the ancient Thor's hammer is a lot more than just a weapon as shown in the movies. It was an artifact for blessings, as shown at Baldur's funeral pyre. In a lot of ancient records, they found that it was used possibly in weddings. It was used as a marking for territory, and as well as it was an amulet that they would wear for protection. How I decided on my modern interpretation. Having to pick an artifact, it took me a while. I thought about Odin's spear. I thought about the many boats they depict in their myths. I thought about maybe doing a map of the 9 realms, but in the end I decided upon Thor's hammer for sort of the way described earlier. Is a really easy way to show a visual comparison between the two. And on the right here is sort of a shot of the two hammers are made. Materials used in the creation of my modern interpretation. So I used a tissue box for the modern Thor's hammer. There's an image of it laying on the rocks there as I was trying to recreate in the first Thor movie when it was stuck in a rock. I used an Apple iPhone case, a smaller box for the ancient Thor's hammer. I used a paper towel and toilet paper rolls for the handles. The paper towel roll, the longer one, was for the modern one, and the toilet paper roll, shorter, for the ancient one. I used aluminum foil to sort of wrap around the tissue box. Sorry about that. I used gray and brown spray paint to sort of cover up the paper towel rolls. Gray I used for the ancient one. Brown I decided to use for the handle of the modern one. Even though the handle was already brown, I made it more brown. I used black and a white acrylic paint to put in the ancient symbols onto the ancient Thor's hammer. And I used sort of a heavy grade silver tape as well to add to the modern one. First, on the right is a picture of me holding the ancient Thor's hammer with an iron glove. And then how long did it take? It took actually making each hammer about 2 days, 1 day for each hammer. And gathering everything, it took a little over a week, largely to get the paper towel and toilet paper rolls, since I had to wait till my family used up all the paper on each one. And then it took a while longer for spray painting, which I did a couple coats on each one, as well as the acrylic painting, which took me a couple hours to sort of add the design. And then there was the gluing and taping. It took a couple hours of gluing before I decided that taping, sort of a secretive taping on each handle, was much easier. Any struggles I went with is materials were surprisingly not surprisingly eliminated with our pandemic, and as well as I found some difficulty in adding aluminum foil to the modern Thor's hammer after I'd finished with all my painting and gluing. So a brief background on my research project. For my research project later I'll be turning in at the end of the semester is I'm using a lot of Norse mythology as well as other cultural writings from Scandinavia such as sagas and Beowulf to highlight any cultural significances that can be found in the text, such as oaths, which were a very strong sort of motif showing up in a lot of the Prose Edda, dreams, which were always kind of called back on. I later found that there was a lot of information in text on kings and what's a good king, what's a bad king, and then more such as fate and mystics and even artifacts themselves in the text. Then I hope to compare all this to how it is presented today. My sources for the research project would be, for primary, the Prose Edda, which I hope to find at least 2 to 3 myths to really highlight how mythology showed cultural significance in their motifs, And then I found Beowulf, which I hope to use to show how a good and bad king is, which I found from analysis towards the end between Beowulf versus the dragon. Then I wanted to use Gisli's saga to really highlight dreams, which he shows a lot of towards the end of the saga and as well as in between parts in the middle. For my secondary sources, I hope to use, or I will be using, the Vikings film from 1958, Neil Gaiman's Norse Mythology, John Lindau's Thor's Hammer, a academic text, Dreams in the Icelandic Tradition, and as well as the 2019 series Vinland Saga. My very rough research thesis, since I'm still gathering information for the paper and putting it all together. This is a very rough one. Here it is. There are similarities between modern interpretations and ancient Norse mythology, but where media today idolizes Scandinavians solely for their violence, ancient sagas and myths share preserving a sophisticated culture that puts emphasis on oaths, family, the power of dreams, and the ideas of fate and mystics. Now, what is the modern perspective that I hope to show in Scandinavian culture for Scandinavian culture? I found that a lot of sources, such as Vikings 1958, the sort of new semi-old now Beowulf CGI film, others such as God of War and the Vinland Saga series, and as well as Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology, that a lot of them sort of put a lot of emphasis on idolizing violence, of putting a lot of sensationalization of Vikings, such as seen in the movie The Vikings, where they had a lot of crazy stuff they did in their hall. And then there's sort of that, I found that there's sort of a deconstruction in Norse mythology where a lot will completely rewrite it, a lot will put a modern spin on it, such as Neil Gaiman did, such as the Vikings, where they really only show them worshiping one god, such as Odin. Others that will keep a lot of the names, but change it up quite a bit, like God of War. Sort of modern perspective on how they've changed it, how they've maybe thinned it out, made it a lot more one-dimensional compared to the sophisticated, different ideas that I found throughout mythology. Well, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.